A parent's heartbreak, the loss of our son, and the family rift that followed. I remember the exact moment I felt the ground slip beneath me. The call came early that morning. One I'd hoped and prayed would never come. My son, my Stephen, was gone. The heartache was instantaneous. A sharp, numbing pain that cut through my chest and left me gasping for air. I had lost my child. But even then, I couldn't fully grasp that this was just the beginning of an unraveling that would rip through the rest of my family. Stephen was my youngest, and he'd always been different. A bit quieter, more introspective. He saw the world in a way that sometimes bewildered me but filled me with pride. At 6 years old, when he was diagnosed with autism, my husband and I were overwhelmed. We didn't know what it meant for his future. But we were determined to give him every possible support. We loved him, fiercely, and wanted him to have everything he needed to navigate a world that might not understand him as we did. We were told by doctors and specialists that he would benefit from therapies, routines, and certain accommodations. And so, we did everything they advised. Therapy sessions, social skills classes, support groups. We committed ourselves to his growth and well-being, hoping he would learn, adapt, and find happiness. But looking back, I see how our intentions may have come across differently to him. Stephen grew increasingly resistant to these interventions, and he began to pull away. He told us over and over that he didn't want to be treated like he was different, that he didn't want to be known as the autistic kid. My heart ached every time he said it, but I kept hoping he'd understand that we just wanted the best for him. We thought that by encouraging him to accept help, he would be better equipped to handle life's challenges. But, as the years went by, our vision for him and his own desires seemed to be on opposite paths. I still remember the fights, the pleading, and the frustration that grew between us. Stephen was a teenager by then, a time when every child grapples with self-identity. But for him, it was even more complicated. He wanted to blend in, to go to a school where no one knew his diagnosis. He even begged us to stop reminding him of it. But we didn't listen. We thought we were right, convinced that he needed these supports in place. In our minds, it was protection. In his, it was control. By the time he was 15, he was already deeply isolated. He would lock himself in his room for hours on end, refusing to come out unless it was absolutely necessary. He began missing family dinners, avoiding gatherings, and even stopped celebrating his birthday because, as he told me once, it was just another reminder that his life wasn't getting any better. Then came the first attempt. One evening, we found him unconscious in his room, and the terror of that moment will never leave me. My husband and I were petrified, shaken to our cores, but still, we were resolute. We doubled down on the therapy. Even as Stephen continued to resist, he wouldn't take medication, refused counseling, and barely tolerated our presence. The gap between us widened, each of us standing firm in what we believed to be right. When he turned 18, Stephen left. He got accepted into a prestigious university and cut off all contact with us. The goodbye letter he left was seething with anger, accusing us of ruining his life, of suffocating him with a label he never wanted. He wrote that we'd taken 12 years of his life, and he never wanted to speak to us again. I remember rereading that letter, hoping to find some hidden message, something that said he didn't mean it, that it was just the heat of anger. But there was nothing. Our other children, Kate and James, were devastated. Stephen had kept in touch with them, and they would occasionally tell us how he was doing. At first, he seemed to be adjusting, even thriving, but his struggles with depression never fully faded. And eventually, he fell back into a darkness that we hadn't been able to pull him out of. The day we lost him was beyond any pain I had ever known. But my grief was compounded when Kate and James began blaming us. Kate, in particular, was furious. She said we had driven Stephen to his death by refusing to listen to him, by insisting he needed help he never wanted. James, though quieter, agreed with her. They both felt we'd been too controlling, too insistent on a path Stephen had never chosen for himself. They couldn't understand that we had only wanted to protect him. Kate, who had always been so close to me, told me she couldn't forgive us. She moved out that same day, saying that if we couldn't see our fault in this, she wanted no part of our lives. James distanced himself as well. And just like that, we had lost all 3 of our children. I was left alone with my husband. But even he was slipping away from me. He began drinking heavily, something he'd never done before. Our grief and guilt consumed us. But instead of finding solace in each other, we became strangers, each wrapped in our own anguish. I would catch him late at night, staring blankly into a bottle of vodka, and I knew he was reliving every moment, every choice we'd made with Stephen. In the months that followed, I tried to reach out to Kate, to James, but they wouldn't answer. My attempts were met with silence, and every unanswered call felt like another nail in the coffin of my family. My husband's drinking worsened, and with every drink, he became angrier, blaming me, blaming society, blaming everyone but himself. Eventually, I found myself questioning everything. Had we really done the right thing? Had our insistence on helping Stephen blinded us to his needs? The thought haunted me, kept me awake at night, whispering doubts into every corner of my mind, but I still couldn't fully accept that it was all our fault. We had tried our best, hadn't we? As time passed, I realized that forgiveness, both from my children and myself, might never come. But one thing became clear: the importance of listening, truly listening, to those we love. Stephen had tried to tell us what he wanted, what he needed, but we hadn't listened. We thought we knew best. But in doing so, we lost sight of who he was. In the end, I've learned that love sometimes means letting go, even when every fiber of your being tells you to hold on tighter. It's a painful lesson, one I wish I had learned sooner. But now, all I can do is hope that sharing this story might help others avoid the same mistakes. Perhaps, in some way, this reflection is my way of making amends. I can't bring Stephen back, nor can I undo the rift that now separates me from my surviving children. But maybe, just maybe, this story will serve as a reminder that sometimes, the best way to love someone is to let them find their own path, even if it's not the one we would have chosen for them. When trust breaks, a year-long relationship shattered by secrets and self-discovery. Imagine finding yourself at the brink of what you believe is a dream relationship, only to stumble upon a hidden truth that completely shakes your faith in love. This is the story of how a young man thought he had found the one, only to confront a shadow from the past that shattered his dreams. It's not just about betrayal, but about how different people define loyalty, navigate pain, and the unexpected turns that push us toward rediscovering our worth. As you follow this journey, you'll see how he grapples with complex emotions, encounters unexpected revelations, and hears perspectives that make him question everything he thought he knew about love and loyalty. His story will make you wonder, when is it worth fighting for love? And when is it time to walk away? As the winter months rolled in, our protagonist, Ethan, found himself deeply invested in his relationship with Jess. They'd been dating for just under a year, and he felt a warmth and connection with her that he hadn't experienced in any previous relationship. They had started casually, but for Ethan, it had quickly grown serious. Jess seemed to reflect the values he held close: loyalty, openness, and a desire for something real. Everything felt seamless until one evening at a holiday gathering. Ethan and Jess were at a friend's place, surrounded by familiar faces, but something caught Ethan's attention: a strange exchange between Jess and another man, Michael, someone he didn't recognize. There was a moment, fleeting but loaded with tension, as if they shared a history that was best kept unspoken. At first, he brushed it off, but throughout the evening, he kept noticing subtle glances and quiet exchanges between them. Ethan dismissed it as nothing more than his mind playing tricks on him. But later that night, as they were heading home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael, who got his number from a mutual friend. The message cut deep. "Hey, I thought you should know, I hooked up with Jess after Christmas last year. I figured you might want to hear it from someone else before it's too late." For Ethan, the world seemed to slow down. The message left him numb, the words sinking in painfully. He couldn't ignore the wave of betrayal washing over him, but at the same time, he wanted answers. He wanted to hear Jess's side of the story. Confronting her that night, Ethan felt the anticipation of honesty or, perhaps, denial. Jess's reaction, however, was unexpected. She looked at him with sorrow in her eyes, as though she knew this moment would come but had hoped to avoid it. With a shaky voice, she confessed that, yes, she had indeed met Michael on a dating app before she and Ethan became official. They'd hooked up a couple of times, but she swore that it ended before she and Ethan had labeled their relationship. Jess's explanation felt insufficient to Ethan. She reasoned that at that time, She wasn't sure if their relationship would evolve into anything meaningful. She admitted she had considered telling him but feared it might ruin what they had. Her confession left Ethan more conflicted than ever. The timeline might have technically kept her actions outside of cheating. But his heart wasn't interested in technicalities. He felt as if a crucial layer of trust had been stripped away. The following weeks were a spiral of emotions. Ethan kept questioning whether he could truly move past this. Replaying their early days in his mind, he remembered how Jess had been adamant about taking things slow physically, claiming she wanted to build a deeper connection before becoming intimate. Yet, now he couldn't shake the image of her being with someone else while she was supposedly getting to know him. He couldn't reconcile how someone could compartmentalize intimacy in that way. In search of solace, Ethan began distancing himself from friends, fearing judgment or unwelcome advice. He struggled alone, trying to rationalize Jess's actions against his feelings of betrayal. He kept imagining a future together but found himself haunted by flashes of doubt and pain. Small gestures and memories were now tainted, shadowed by the question, was I ever truly enough? One day, Ethan met with an old friend, Sarah, who had a unique perspective on relationships. She encouraged him to see that people often make mistakes before finding clarity about what they truly want. Sarah shared her own story of a past relationship where she had also hesitated, unsure if she was ready for a serious commitment, which had unintentionally hurt her partner. This conversation opened Ethan's eyes to a painful but important truth. People sometimes have unresolved emotions or hidden fears that lead to actions they later regret. Ethan tried to talk things over with Jess again, hoping that another honest discussion might give him the closure or reassurance he needed. Jess was open, but her explanations felt hollow. She claimed she didn't want to hurt him, that she didn't fully realize her feelings for him at the time. Ethan struggled to understand this rationale, feeling that even if it wasn't betrayal in the strictest sense, it was still a breach of trust. Ethan's heart felt torn. He couldn't deny that he cared deeply for Jess, and part of him still wanted to make it work. But a gnawing feeling kept pulling him back to the thought that if this was the foundation of their relationship, could he ever fully trust her? Finally, after much contemplation, Ethan made a decision. He called Jess and asked her to meet at a quiet cafe they both frequented. When they sat down, he looked at her, seeing the woman he had loved for almost a year. But he realized that love wasn't enough to erase the hurt. Gently but firmly, he told her that he couldn't keep moving forward with so much unresolved pain between them. Jess's face reflected a mix of sorrow and acceptance, and they shared a bittersweet goodbye. As Ethan walked away, he felt a strange sense of peace amid the sadness. He knew he had made the right choice, prioritizing his own well-being over a relationship built on shaky ground. It was a painful but necessary step towards rediscovering his own worth. Unmasking the truth: how I exposed my boyfriend's betrayal on his biggest night. As I sat alone, staring at the photos I had just found, a mix of emotions flooded over me. Anger, hurt, betrayal. How could he do this to me? And at such a significant moment in his life? Here he was, preparing for the biggest night of his life, a grand award ceremony attended by dignitaries, family, and friends. I was the one who had worked tirelessly, creating a video tribute to honor him. And it was only because of that effort that I stumbled across the undeniable proof of his betrayal. There was no question in my mind about what I had seen. But now, the real question was, what would I do about it? As I contemplated my next steps, 1,000 scenarios ran through my mind. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers and see if he would even try to explain himself. But another part of me wanted to make a lasting impact, to let him know that I was aware of his infidelity without uttering a word. I considered the idea of slipping a subtle photo of him and the other woman into the video tribute, a quiet but piercing reminder that I knew. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this approach would give me the closure I needed, without sacrificing my dignity. The hours leading up to the ceremony were a blur of emotions. I could barely keep my hands steady as I finalized the slideshow. Each photo, each carefully selected memory, reminded me of the life we had built, or at least, the life I thought we had built. I added the incriminating photo, making sure it blended seamlessly into the reel, appearing only briefly so that only he and I would recognize it. It was a moment of power amidst my heartbreak, A chance to reclaim control over the situation that had so brutally blindsided me. When the ceremony began, I felt like I was moving through a dream. His family was there, beaming with pride, unaware of the storm brewing within me. As I watched him accept his award, delivering a speech filled with gratitude and humility, I felt a pang of irony. Here he was, celebrated as a man of character, while secretly betraying the one who loved him most. I waited for the moment when the slideshow would play, my heart pounding with anticipation. The slideshow began, and as each memory flashed across the screen, I saw his smile fade slightly when the photo appeared, a picture of him and the other woman. To anyone else, it looked like an innocent moment with a friend, but he knew. I saw his eyes scan the room, searching for me, his expression turning to confusion and fear. I simply held his gaze, giving him a small nod before quietly slipping out of the room. My parting gesture was silent, but it spoke volumes. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Within minutes, my phone was flooded with texts from him, asking where I had gone, what I knew, and how I had discovered the photo. I ignored the messages, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me as I drove home. It was as if a weight had been lifted, as though I had reclaimed my sense of self after months of living in the shadow of his deception. The next day, he called, asking if we could meet and talk. I agreed, more out of curiosity than any hope for reconciliation. We met at a quiet coffee shop, where he immediately launched into a string of excuses, claiming it was a mistake, that he regretted it, that she didn't mean anything to him. I listened patiently, allowing him to explain himself. But I knew my mind was made up. His betrayal was a reflection of his character, not of my worth, and I refused to let his poor choices diminish my self-respect. When he was finished, he looked at me with desperation, searching for a sign that I might forgive him. Instead, I simply asked, "So, where did you stay the past few nights? With her?" He stammered, unable to provide an answer. And I knew the truth. I told him that I had no interest in changing who he was, that if he was naturally someone who could cheat and lie, then he wasn't someone I wanted to be with. His final attempt to salvage the situation was a feeble mention that he had been considering proposing to me. My response was swift and unyielding. Good thing I found out before. Over the following weeks, I worked to heal, rebuilding my life without him. Friends and family asked about him, and I simply explained that we had parted ways. I was free from his deceit, but the experience had left me cautious, wary of trusting too easily. That wariness came into play again with someone else in my life, a friend named Kyla. Kyla was a mutual friend of mine and my ex's, someone who had once supported us both, or so I thought. It wasn't until months later that I discovered Kyla's true feelings. She had once bet that my relationship wouldn't last, convinced that I wasn't the right person for him. When I confronted her about this, she brushed it off as a joke from years ago. But the damage was done. Her comments had been more than a joke. They had been a reflection of her own insecurities and judgments. At first, I tried to brush off Kyla's betrayal, convincing myself that it was a one-time lapse in judgment. But as time went on, I began to notice subtle actions, little things she did that seemed designed to undermine my happiness. It became clear that she thrived on drama, inserting herself into my life in ways that left me questioning her intentions. When my ex's former girlfriend tried to reconnect with him, Kyla seemed all too eager to get involved, claiming she was simply helping me by investigating the situation. In reality, her actions only served to fan the flames of distrust, further complicating my emotions. Eventually, I decided that enough was enough. I distanced myself from Kyla, choosing to surround myself with people who genuinely cared for me, rather than those who sought to stir up trouble. The experience with both my ex and Kyla taught me a valuable lesson about trust, self-respect, and the importance of setting boundaries. Looking back, I realized that these betrayals were painful but necessary. They forced me to confront the reality of my relationships and evaluate the people I allowed into my life. I learned that while forgiveness is a virtue, there are times when walking away is the healthiest choice. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, and in some cases, it's not worth the effort. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my sense of self-worth, knowing that my value doesn't depend on the actions of others. In the end, I walked away stronger, more resilient, and more discerning about the company I keep. My story serves as a reminder that while betrayal is painful, it's also an opportunity for growth. By unmasking the truth, I reclaimed my dignity, and in doing so, I discovered a deeper strength within myself. Shattered bonds, the unforgivable betrayal that tore our family apart. It all began as an ordinary day, one that should have passed without incident or drama. My husband, whom we'll call Paul, was home late as usual. This was the norm. Paul always had late meetings, long hours, and, admittedly, a rigorous work ethic in his demanding job in finance. But this particular evening was different, marking a shift that would unravel every certainty I'd ever had about my life and my family. After nearly 20 years together, I thought I understood the man I married. Sure, our relationship had grown distant over the years. I was a stay-at-home mom who had devoted my life to our children, Eric, 18, and Mary, 15. They were my pride and joy, the lights of my life, while Paul seemed to drift further away, engrossed in work. Perhaps, in our quiet moments, I sometimes acknowledged the strain in our relationship, the tension that simmered beneath the surface. But I had never imagined the extent of his betrayal, the depth of his disregard for the family we'd built. I remember the moment like it was yesterday. Paul was sitting at the dining table, his face buried in his phone as he swiped through messages and closed apps. That evening, I happened to glance over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of something that froze me in my tracks, a message from Amy, Eric's girlfriend, the girl my son adored with all the innocence and earnestness of first love. She'd been like family to us, someone I cared for deeply. But what I saw on Paul's phone shattered that familiar image. The message was intimate, brazen, leaving no room for doubt. I couldn't shake the visceral reaction of horror, anger, and betrayal that flooded my senses. At first, I convinced myself that I must have misunderstood. It was a mistake, surely, but the seed of doubt had been planted. And as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I was pulled toward the truth like a moth to flame, compelled to confront the ugly reality I'd glimpsed. Over the next few days, I pieced together the undeniable facts. Paul was having an affair with Amy, our son's girlfriend. In the days that followed, I unearthed messages that tore into my heart, displaying a level of cruelty I'd never anticipated. My husband, the man I'd once admired, had been mocking me to this young girl, sharing intimate jabs and belittling me behind my back. They laughed at my age, my appearance, and the things I tried so hard to hold together. And there, hidden among the biting comments, were expressions of desire and intimacy that I couldn't bring myself to read fully. The discovery gutted me, leaving me reeling as I tried to make sense of how my life had spiraled into this nightmare. I remembered the hints, the small signs I'd brushed aside as paranoia. I'd even found a stray piece of lingerie in our bedroom a few weeks before, convincing myself it belonged to Mary, even though that explanation made little sense. In my heart, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to confront it until now. More than my own heartbreak, I worried about Eric. He idolized Amy, she was his first love, a girl he believed was pure and good. The thought of telling him the truth was unbearable. How could I explain to him that the girl he loved was involved with his own father? It was a truth so twisted and cruel that even I struggled to fully comprehend it. But as much as it pained me, I knew I couldn't protect him from the truth forever. With each passing day, my resentment toward Paul deepened. I had given him years of loyalty, raising our children and maintaining our home while he pursued his career. And yet, he'd chosen to betray me, to humiliate me in ways I could barely begin to articulate. I felt myself turning numb, a self-protective shell forming as I braced for the inevitable confrontation. When I finally broke the news to Eric and Mary, it was like tearing open an old wound. Eric was devastated, his world crumbling as he grappled with the betrayal of not only his girlfriend but also his father. Mary was furious, her anger raw and unfiltered as she directed it at Paul. It was a painful moment, watching my children's innocence shatter before my eyes. But in that shared pain, we found a sense of solidarity. We were hurt, yes, but we were also determined to rebuild, to piece together the remnants of our lives and find a way forward. In the days that followed, I took careful steps to protect myself and my children. I reached out to a lawyer, documenting everything, every message, every piece of evidence that could help secure our future. Paul, sensing the tides turning against him, tried to reach out, his attempts at reconciliation weak and insincere. I could see the fear in his eyes, the The panic that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. As we prepared for the difficult road ahead, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned from this painful ordeal. I realized that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. My children and I had been blindsided by a betrayal we never saw coming. But we were stronger than Paul had ever given us credit for. We would rebuild, not out of spite, but out of a fierce determination to reclaim our lives. In the end, I vowed never to let someone else dictate my worth. I had spent years catering to Paul's needs, sacrificing my own happiness to keep our family together. But now, standing at the threshold of a new beginning, I felt a sense of liberation. I wasn't defined by his betrayal, nor by the pain he'd caused. I was defined by my strength, my resilience, and my ability to rise above even the darkest moments. As I look toward the future, I know there will be challenges, moments of doubt, and lingering scars, but I am determined to build a life of honesty, integrity, and love, a life that my children can look up to with pride. And while the wounds of Paul's betrayal may never fully heal, I am choosing to let go, to embrace the possibilities that lie ahead, and to move forward with a heart unburdened by bitterness. In this painful journey, I've learned that sometimes, the most profound betrayals can teach us the greatest lessons. We are stronger than we know, capable of rising above even the most devastating trials. And while trust may be fragile, love and resilience are the forces that carry us forward, guiding us toward a future where we are free to write our own stories.